Hey guys, welcome to the 2022 Year 9 5.2 Indices topic test. First question, we have p cubed times p to the power of 5. All we have to do is add the powers together, so it becomes p to the power of 8. Second question is division, and there is one of those terms without a power, so that's an invisible one. So we do subtraction of the powers due to division, and it becomes 3 minus 1, which gives us m to the power of 2. For question C, we multiply the coefficients. 3 times 2 is 6. We add the powers of v. 3 plus 4 plus 1 gives us v to the power of 8. So 6v to the power of 8 altogether. For question D, we divide the coefficients. 15 divided by minus 5 is negative 3. And then we look at the powers. It's a subtraction because of the division sign. So 5 minus 9 gives us negative 4. So we have minus 3z to the power of negative 4. However, the question states that all indices must be positive. So we need to move that z to the denominator, and that gives us negative 3 over z to the power of 4. For question E, we just multiply the powers. That gives us h to the power of 18. For question F, we replace all the powers of 0 with 1. So d to the power of 0 becomes 1, 4d all to the power of 0 becomes 1, and 2d all to the power of 0 becomes 1. However, the 10 and the minus 3 remain there, and the reason is because they have an invisible power of 1. So that gives us 10 plus 1 minus 3, which becomes 8. Question 2a, we have negative powers. That just means that we move them either from the numerator to the denominator or from the denominator to the numerator to get rid of the negative. For the first question, q to the power of minus 3, that's on the numerator, so we're going to move it to the denominator, so it becomes 1 over q cubed. Question B, only the x has a negative power, so it's only the x that moves, so the answer is 2 over x. Question C, there's brackets around 5p. That means all of 5p needs to move, so it becomes 1 over 5p. Question D, it's only the x that has a negative power once again. So we move it from the denominator to the numerator. That gives us x over 2. Question E, we move 10x from the denominator to the numerator first. So that gives us 5 bracket 10x all squared. Then we need to expand those brackets. So we leave the 5 alone, 10 squared becomes 100, and x to the power of 2 is x squared. And then we need to expand the bracket by multiplying by 5, so 5 times 100x squared becomes 500x squared. Question F, we have a fraction all to the power of minus 1. Minus 1 just means flip it upside down, so 3x over 5y becomes 5y over 3x. Question G, we get rid of the negative part of the power first. So we flip the fraction upside down. 7k moves to the numerator, 2w goes to the denominator, and the negative disappears. Next, we multiply to get rid of those brackets. 7 to the power of 3 is 343. K to the power of 3 is k cubed. 2 to the power of 3 is 8. And w to the power of 3 is w cubed. So our final answer is 343k cubed all over 8w cubed. Question 3, we need to expand those brackets. Minus 2 to the power of 4, a to the power of 8, and b to the power of 12. We just use multiplication of the powers. You can put minus 2 all to the power of 4 in your calculator. Make sure you use brackets there so that you don't get minus 16. And so the correct answer is 16, a to the power of 8, b to the power of 12. Question B, we expand the brackets for the numerator. 3 squared is 9, and 7 times 2 gives us m to the power of 14. For the denominator, it's division, so we do 10 minus 4 for the powers. That gives us m to the power of 6. Finally, we can simplify that. 14 minus 6 for the powers of m gives us 9m to the power of 8. Question C, there's many ways to do this. We're going to simplify the numerator, and we're going to simplify the denominator, then we're going to simplify the whole fraction. So for the numerator, I do 16 times 9 times 2. That gets me 288. And then I leave p to the power of 7, q to the power of 4, and r to the power of 4 alone. For the denominator, I do 20 times 3. That gives me 60. And I leave p to the power of 5 and q to the power of 9 alone. Then I put 288 over 60 in my calculator. That gives me 24 over 5. I simplify p over 7. Then I simplify 288 over 60. That gives me 24 over 5. Next, I look at the p's. P to the power of 7 over p to the power of 5. That's a subtraction because the fraction sign is division. So I do 7 minus 5 for the powers. That gets me p squared. I leave r alone because there's no other r's. So it becomes r to the power of 4. Then I look at the q's. There's q to the power of 9 on the denominator, q to the power of 4 on the numerator. That means that there's extra q's on the denominator. So I do my 9 minus 4, and I get q to the power of 5 on the denominator. Question D, I'm going to expand those brackets. 4 to the power of 3 is 64. 2 times 3 for the powers of x gives me x to the power of 6. And 1 times 3 for the powers of y gives me y to the power of 3. I leave x squared and y alone. On the denominator, 12 is outside the brackets, so I don't touch that. Expanding the brackets gets me x squared and y to the power of 4. Next, I need to simplify the numerator. So I do x to the power of 6 times x to the power of 2. So I add the powers. That gives me x to the power of 8. A similar thing for the powers of y gives me y to the power of 4. Everything else I leave alone. Then I simplify the coefficients. 64 over 12 is 16 over 3. For the x's, I do a subtraction of the powers because it's a fraction. So 8 minus 2 gives me x to the power of 6. For y, I have the same term on the numerator and the denominator, so they cancel. So my final answer is 16x to the power of 6 over 3. Question E, I simplify the numerator first. That gets me 40a to the power of 4, b to the power of 4. Then I expand the brackets on the denominator. 5 squared is 25. 3 times 2 for the powers of a gives me a to the power of 6. I leave 3b to the power of minus 4 alone. Next, I'm going to simplify the denominator. So I do 25 times 3, that's 75. I leave everything else alone. Finally, I'm going to simplify my entire fraction. 40 over 75 becomes 8 over 15. Then I look at my a's. I have 6 on the denominator, 4 on the numerator. That gets me a squared on the denominator. For b, you have to do a subtraction. So it becomes 4 minus minus 4. Those two minuses become a plus. 4 plus 4 is 8. So that's b to the power of 8. That gives us a final answer of 8b to the power of 8 over 15a squared. Question 4 is a little tricky. We have to work backwards. When we see addition in the powers, that means it's a multiplication on the bases. So I write 3 to the power of x and 3 to the power of 1, and that plus in the powers means a multiplication of the bases. So I get 3 to the power of x times 3 to the power of 1, and the question says I can replace 3 to the power of x with 5, so that becomes 5 times 3, which is 15. Question B, very similar, but this time you have a minus in the power. That means a division, so it becomes 3 to the power of x divided by 3 to the power of 4. Once again, replace 3 to the power of x with 5 as per the question, and it becomes 5 divided by 81. You have to write it as a fraction, so that becomes 5 over 81. Question 5 looks really complicated. You should always try and simplify within the brackets first before expanding. So we're going to simplify the numerator first. 3m plus m is 4m. 1 plus 6 is 7. So that gives me a to the power of 4m plus 7. Everything else stays the same. Next, I'm going to do the division. Division is a subtraction. So 4m minus minus 2m, that's a plus. So 4m plus 2m is 6m. 7 minus 5, that's 2. So my answer there is a to the power of 6m plus 2. Finally, I'm ready to expand those brackets. Negative 3 times 6m is negative 18m. Negative 3 times 2 is negative 6. Final answer, a to the power of negative 18m minus 6. Question 6, we start by removing the negative indices, so that becomes p over q minus q over p. Then we have two fractions. We need a common denominator. That's going to be pq. So the first term I'm going to multiply by p over p, and the second one I'm going to multiply by q over q. Now that I've got a common denominator of pq, I simplify the numerator. P times p is p squared. Q times q is q squared. So it becomes p squared minus q squared all over pq. Question 7. Once again, there's many ways to do this. We're going to simplify the numerator and the denominator. Then we're going to clean it up at the end. So firstly, expanding the brackets on the numerator gives me x to the power of 4 and y to the power of 10. Everything else on the numerator I leave alone. On the denominator, I just combine the 10 and the x to the power of 10, which gives me 10x to the power of 10. I can simplify the numerator a little bit more, so that's what I'm going to do. I leave the 5 alone. Combining x to the power of 8 times x to the power of 4, I add those powers together. That gets me x to the power of 12. Similarly for y, I combine minus 12 plus 10, and I get y to the power of minus 2. I leave everything else alone. Now I'm ready to do the final step and clean up my fraction. 5 over 10 simplifies to 1 over 2. For the x's, x to the power of 12 over x to the power of 10. I subtract the powers. That gets me x to the power of 2. For the y's, there's only one y, and that's y to the power of minus 2. So I need to move that to the denominator to make that positive. So that moves to the denominator and becomes y squared. Final answer, x to the power of 2 over 2y to the power of 2. Question B. Once again, we start by simplifying inside the brackets first. So I replace that numerator with 1 because it's all to the power of 0. And in the denominator, I replace x to the power of 0 with 1 as well. Then I'm going to expand those brackets. 1 to the power of 4 is just 1. 3 to the power of 4 is 81. And 2 times 4 for the powers of y gives me y to the power of 8. On the right hand side, that term I can leave alone. I don't need to do anything there. Then I'm going to combine those fractions by doing my multiplication first. So I get 1 times 9y to the power of 10. That's just 9y to the power of 10. On the denominator, everything's different, so I write it all together, and it becomes 81 x to the power of minus 3, y to the power of 8. Finally, I'm going to simplify all of that. 9 over 81 becomes 1 over 9. I look at the x's. It's a negative power, so I need to move it from the denominator to the numerator, and so x cubed goes to the numerator. For the y's, I do a subtraction due to division. So 10 minus 8 for the powers gets me y squared. Final answer, x to the power of 3, y to the power of 2, all over 9. Question C, I need to use KCF first. So I keep the first fraction, I change the division to a multiplication, and I flip my second fraction upside down. That's all I do for the first step. Then I need to expand those brackets. So that first bracket, 4 squared becomes 16. I multiply the powers. That gets me m to the power of 4, n to the power of 6. For the second set of brackets, I multiply the powers again. That gets me m to the power of 9, n to the power of 6. On the denominator, it's a multiplication, so I combine those powers. So that gives me 2m to the power of 6, n to the power of 9. You add them due to the multiplication sign in between the fractions. I'm going to simplify the numerator before I simplify the whole thing. So I combine the powers for the numerator as well. That gets me 16m to the power of 13, n to the power of 12, all over 2m to the power of 6, n to the power of 9. Finally, I do my division. 16 divided by 2 is 8. And for the pronumerals, I subtract the powers. So 13 minus 6 gives me m to the power of 7. 12 minus 9 gives me n to the power of 3. Final answer, 8m to the power of 7, n to the power of 3. For the last question, we start by using KCF once again. So I keep the first fraction exactly the same. I change the division to multiplication, and I flip the second fraction upside down. Then I expand my brackets. 5 squared is 25. I multiply the powers. That gets me m to the power of 8, n to the power of negative 6. I leave everything else on the numerator the same. On the denominator, I'm only expanding the brackets on the bottom right. 5 is outside the bracket, so I leave that alone. I do minus 1 times minus 2. That gets me m squared. I do 1 times minus 2. That gets me n to the power of negative 2. Now I need to clean up the numerator and the denominator. For the numerator, 25 I leave alone. Add the powers of m. That gets me m to the power of 9. Combine the powers of n. That gets me n to the power of negative 10. On the denominator, I leave 5 alone. Add the powers of m. Minus 1 plus 2 is 1. So that's just m. For n, it's 2 minus 2, which is 0, so I don't need to write any n's. Finally, I can simplify to get my final answer. 25 over 5 is 5. 9 minus 1 for the powers of m, that gets me m to the power of 8. N needs to move to the denominator, and that's n to the power of 10 on the denominator. Final answer, 5m to the power of 8, all over n to the power of 10.